So, okay, so hello and welcome everyone. I'm going to share a little bit about Krishna for those of you that are coming from CNA and are new to his work. Hold on one moment. Sorry, this is quite a mighty pause, but okay. All right, so Krishna Gauci is based here in Portland, Oregon, where I currently am, and he also travels right now anywhere that he's invited to teach. He's a longtime member of the Center for Non-Dual Awareness and the developer of the Tapestry of Being paradigm, and has been a teacher of spiritual living since 2001. He loves bridging various traditional influences to serve 21st century people in orienting to the mystery of being. I love that. He became I just want to remind everyone to stay on mute, please, if you can. Thank you. He became a devotee of his spiritual master, H.W.L. Punjaji Papaji, meeting him in 1993. He also has a background in the practice of Buddhist meditation for 27 years. He's a founding member of the Waking Down Teachers Association and the Institute of Awakened Mutuality, and he's been working as a senior Trillium Awakening teacher. He currently offers his own Tapestry of Being teachings with students worldwide. And I also wanted to read a little part about the bio that's on your website, Krishna, because I love this part here. Krishna's experience is that you will never have exactly what you want and that you are already what you're looking for. His sense is that you don't need to be taught as much as you need to be understood and heard. He is well versed in several spiritual maps, but he knows that who you are is beyond any map. You are the changeless, and you are always changing, and he relates to you as both. He supports you in one-on-one sessions and in groups like this through talks, guided meditation, question and answer, gazing transmissions, and silent sitting. He invites everyone to roll up their sleeves and celebrate the paradox of being both infinite and finite simultaneously. His sleeves are rolled up too. And without further ado, Krishna, I will hand it over to you. Thank you so much for being here. Oh, wait, let me take you off mute. Hold on one second. Are you there? Oh, there you are. Okay.
How's that?
Perfect. Hi.
Hey, Sarah. Thanks so much.
Hi. You're welcome.
Can you hear me okay? Good. Thanks for that intro. Appreciate it. What I'd like to do today, well, hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. What I'd like to do to start off is just a little open-eyed gazing meditation for, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds to a minute. And then I'm going to open with a chant that I learned from Tibetan Buddhism, just as a way to start off. And then we'll be open to any questions or answers. I'll say a little bit. I'm not sure how long I'll speak because I don't have anything written out or planned in terms of what to say. So it'll be new to me as it is to you as it happens. But very open for this day to be, or this morning, or this time, to be whatever it turns out to be in terms of questions and answers and participation. So I'd like to just start off with a little gazing here. 서로 동불러 여성졸리 물예 아마중 시술락 고라도 간로망 호콜 예키시수 나그둘기 신질로 시식 수솔 아그로 범모 So, I think just a technical thing, Sarah. I think if everybody's mic's muted except for mine, it'd be a good thing. To mute
Yeah.
all. Great, thanks. So often I'll do a meditation starting up, but for some reason I'm feeling right now just to check, and to invite anybody if they have anything they'd like to share or anything any questions that they have, to just open it up immediately. And if there's nothing, then we can do meditation or I can speak some more. But if anybody has any questions or anything they'd like to share, please raise your hand. Okay. So it's great to just visit with you like this. A little bit about the song that I just sang. Those of you who've sat with me before know, but the rest of you might not, that is a song, the 7-line song of Padmasambhava, which is actually a Tibetan song inviting in the presence of the very first Lama in Tibet, Padmasambhava. The way that it was taught to me is that Padmasambhava is a historical person, or was a historical person, whose life is also filled with myth, like no one knows how much. I mean, there's a certain amount of historical reality to him, and then there's things that may or may not be in what they call twilight language, which means symbolic language, or language to try to describe something other than the physical, using language of the physical. So also, I was told that Padmasambhava is the accumulation, or stands for every teacher that you've ever had that has been a Vajra teacher or a teacher of the indestructible, and also is a cosmic principle. Padmasambhava stands for a cosmic principle of guidance. So it's your inner guide. It's all of the teachers you've ever had. And what I'm doing in that is I'm inviting every bit of guidance into the space for us to be together. So that's what that's about. So Sarah mentioned something, and I wrote that quite a while ago, about you are the unchanging and you are the ever-changing, and I address you as both. So there's a way in which we are simply the awareness of everything that's arising. So much of what is teaching of truth, satsang, non-duality, is the recognition of that which doesn't change. And the realization that you are that which doesn't change, that which is simply always aware of everything that arises. That would include the sense fields. For instance, everything that is seen right now is arising in consciousness, is happening in consciousness. And you are simply the awareness of everything that's arising in terms of the visual field, the entire visual field. You are the awareness of the auditory field, everything that's being heard. So if you take all of the sound together that you are aware of, you are the awareness of all of that sound, and you aren't the sound itself. You are the awareness of everything that is seen, but you aren't what is seen. You are the awareness of all smells, of all tastes, but you aren't what is smelt or tasted. You are also the awareness of all feeling, which is a little bit more subtle, a little bit trickier for most of us. So whatever it is that you're feeling, and I'm not speaking just of emotions, you're the awareness of emotions, and you aren't emotions. You're also the awareness of sensation, and not sensation as consciousness. As consciousness, you're the awareness of sensation, even the awareness of bliss, even the awareness of presence. You aren't presence, you aren't bliss, you're the awareness of presence and bliss. Presence and bliss, the sensation of presence and bliss, the experience of presence and bliss can come and go. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not there. But the awareness of presence and bliss doesn't change. It's simply aware of whatever passes, whatever happens, whatever movement there is. Even the thoughts, our thoughts, the thought process, we are the awareness of that thought process of mind. Visual thoughts like seeing something in your mind's eye, like for instance, seeing a faucet dripping, or auditory thoughts like hearing the faucet dripping in your mind. These are all thoughts, and as well as discursive thoughts, the kind of ongoing story, monologue, commentary, judgments that are continuously going on. You aren't those as well. You're aware. You, as consciousness, are the awareness of those, unmoving, unchanging. And so much of awakening, so much of realization, of recognition is the recognition that you are the awareness of all of these. Even the feeling sense you may have of me or of I, you are aware of that, are you not? So in that sense, we are, you are simply awareness itself, consciousness itself. Even attention that's moving around, we're aware of that as well. Maybe attention is on our feet one moment, and it's on our fingers another moment, and it's on our thoughts another moment. And we're aware of this attention moving around. So in that sense, that moving attention is not us either. And you could say discrimination, the discriminating, sometimes it's called discriminating awareness, sometimes discriminating mind, that notices everything that I'm speaking about. It says, looks, oh yeah, I'm aware of that. I'm the awareness of that. Oh, that's moving, that's changing. That looking, that noticing, even that discrimination, we are not. We are aware of that discrimination. We are unmoving, unchanging consciousness. Any notion of I is another object of that awareness that comes and goes, that changes. Any notion of our personal lives is arising, moves and changes. Any feelings of success or failure, low self-esteem, high self-esteem, all of these are rising in consciousness. And we are that consciousness, aware of all of that. So in that sense, everything that is moving and changing is a bit like a weather system that comes in, moves around, changes, dissipates, moves on. And we are the watching without any effort whatsoever. It's our intrinsic nature. It's not that we watch, it's that we are the watching. There isn't any distinction between consciousness and being in that sense. We aren't conscious, we are consciousness itself. In fact, you can say in a sense, there's no we, there's simply consciousness itself, aware of everything that we would call we. There's no I, there's simply consciousness itself, everything aware of what we would call I. There's no me. There's simply consciousness itself, aware of everything that would be called me. So this is the way in which I know that I, you, are this. And here there is really no I in you. This is just a way of speaking. A mirror is a mirror is a mirror. There may be different reflections on different parts of a mirror, but the mirrorness is the same. You cannot partition space. You can look at objects. There are certain objects in one place in space and objects in another place in space. But if you remove the objects or ignore the objects, space is space is space is space. So from the perspective of consciousness itself, you could say there's only one, but there's without a second. So you can't even use the word one really. There simply is consciousness aware of everything. All language which is positive, that points, if it's clung to as a description of consciousness itself, then we miss. So much of this language that's usually used to point is to try to be mindful of that fact. So we speak about silence. Silence is the context of all sound. The silence that is the context of silence and sound is the silence. The deeper silence, the most profound silence, beyond silence and sound. It's the context of all sound. The no mind that is underneath thought and no thought is true no mind. Not just the tiny times when there's no thought, but the context of thought and no thought. Context in which everything is arising. So this is the way in which we are unmoving and unchanging. The way in which we are the moving and the changing is everything that arises. Is inseparable from that. All of the sounds arising in us as consciousness are known because of consciousness and are inseparable from consciousness. And I dare say are the activity of consciousness. So, traditionally, this is always when people get to this, when they speak of this peak, language falls apart, but they use all kinds of metaphors depending on the tradition. One of the most common ones, or one of the most well-known ones, is Shakti. Shiva Shakti. So Shiva is consciousness aware of what moves, what changes, which are the energy of consciousness itself. And when we're at the level at which we're aware of this as an energy, as movement, as feeling, then the word bliss does come, does arise. What arises when it's approached from the perspective of including the context of recognizing consciousness itself ends up being a state of bliss, of openness, of peace, of love. So when looking for our nature as consciousness, the side effect inevitably in the realm of the moving, the changing, is bliss, is love, is peace. These are the qualities of attention resting in the context, in consciousness itself, as consciousness itself. And that is us as well. That is our experience. And you could say our experience is not us, it's simply what we're aware of, and that's true. And you can also say that our experience is us because it's what we live, and that's true. So I like to use this phrase, there's a way in which, because so much of what I've found in among non-dual teachers is the difficulty of, for at least for me, the difficulty of the verb to be, of saying this is real or this is not real. This is what you are, or this is what you are not. That language is very good. We just used it to clarify the nature of consciousness. That language is very useful, very good as a tool. But also it's to remember it's a tool. I mean, it's quite arbitrary because it depends on definitions. Depends on what you mean by real. So I like the words, the phrase, the way, there's a way in which, because there's a way in which you are consciousness itself, unmoving, unchanging. And we just look at the way in which you are unmoving and unchanging consciousness itself. And there's a way in which we are what arises in consciousness itself. And we can look at the way in which we are what arises in consciousness itself, in that it's experienced and it's lived. Now we'll go one step further, which is the kind of heretical, the most heretical. In the midst of this bliss, this peace, this openness, thoughts arise. And from the perspective, the open perspective of energy, thoughts are like a magical display. They can just be watched and noticed. And that energy, which is all this energy is us, is self-liberating through directly feeling what is arising and being present to what is arising. So being present to it is kind of like the consciousness place. And then feeling is the Shakti piece, being all of it. In a sense, you could say non-dually, being like with it, not using thoughts as the means to understand what's arising, but using just direct, immediate experience, unmediated by thought, ignoring the thoughts as descriptors of what is, and being present to every feeling that arises, everything that arises, and then it becomes a blissful display of presence, regardless of the content, which is a strange thing to say. Because think about that, it can be happening in the midst of a war or some circumstance that's just not what we would call pretty. I mean, this is actually what a lot of the imagery in the tantric teachings, both in Hinduism and Buddhism, are pointing to. Often there'll be horrific images that are displays of Buddhas, really fire and wrath, and sometimes, all kinds of horrific images, actually. You've seen Kali, you know what I mean? If you've seen some of the Tibetan harukas, you could see these kind of wrathful deities with corpses and flayings and all kinds of horrible things. And yet these are displays of primal energy. Now there's symbolic things behind that as well, but the point is that it's all a display of consciousness. It's all lilo, you could say, to use a very gentle Hindu term, but it's all kind of a play. It's a magical display. But the third thing I want to say is that is a wonderful position, just as simply being awareness is a wonderful position. Being one with everything is a wonderful position, but it's not the only position from which we experience our lives. So we also experience life as identifying with a sense of ourselves, a personhood of ourselves that's individual from all of this and separate from it, you could say, or at least distinct in the midst of it, even if there's a feeling of not being entirely separate from it, which is wonderful. There's still the sense that I have a job and I have children and I have a mother and I have a father and I have a spouse and all of these, I have this and I have that. And that can be quite gently held because of our exposure to both our nature as consciousness itself and our nature as presence or energy. And yet it's still there held. And it is a part, again, speaking of Leela, it's a part that we are here to play, to live, that has value in itself. Now, of course, its value from my perspective, the more that its value, you could say, shifts and changes, the more we are used to resting as consciousness itself or contacting that dimension of ourselves, which is always simply consciousness itself, at the same time as we are being the individual self. So it's a little bit like Russian dolls, I can never pronounce the word, but you know those, one inside the other, inside the other. So we are consciousness itself, unmoving, unchanging. And within that, we are an energetic display, which is quite blissful, whole, arising. And within that energetic display, we are a person in a story who was born and will die and has relationships and struggles with integrity and fear and joy and the meaning that our life has, and all of those, which for some of us was what we wanted to get away from. And the discovery that there was a dimension where that wasn't true was like enough for us to go, yay, now I'm free, no more. But I'm suggesting something a bit different, that I'm not saying that there will be no beings for whom that is true, but for most of us, that isn't true most of the time. And we need not be in a position of struggling with the notion of ourselves as an individual being. And in fact, we can embrace that one with all of its judgments and all of its rantings and complaints and fears and loves and attachments and aversions and all of that. Not that, you see, the thing about that level of us, this way in which we are as individuals, is that it's constantly changing and is, you could say, the dimension of us that feels best when it's developing, best when it's moving beyond its limitations. And yet, at each moment, is continuously facing its limitations. And so I just wanted to include that as well. You see, this is, from my perspective, this is what, and in the tapestry of being, I talk a lot about this. I consider this a non-dual inclusive teaching, rather than, you could say, or an inclusive non-dual teaching, rather than an exclusive non-dual teaching. Exclusive non-dual teachings either rest as consciousness and consider the rest not real, or rest as consciousness and Shakti and consider the rest not real. And I'm saying all of these are real, and that your life has not been a mistake, even when it's painful. Even the egoic, identified person, as long as that one persists is you, in a sense. There's a way in which it's you. And there's a way in which it's not you, but there's a way in which it's you. And the way in which it's you is valid, is not a mistake, is not wrong, is not a fall. So I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, we have a hand up.
Very good.
Derwin, I'll unmute you.
1 second.
Oh,
Just
sure.
want to invite everybody, if anyone has anything they'd like to share, any comments or anything they'd like to ask about that, this is a good time. So yes, who's the first person?
Derwin.
Derwin.
Hi.
Hi, Derwin.
I can ask you about that one, I guess, which I had another question, but maybe what you just said is more up now. So would that be similar to what like Almas would call the pearl beyond price, or like a unique self? Is that what you're getting at there, or a soul, like an individual soul?
Yeah. Okay. So like I don't know that much about Almas's teaching, but when I hear pearl beyond price, I know there's a relationship between Almas's teaching and Sufi teachings. So there's a similar thing. You could say this. It's not exactly that, but it includes that. So let's say it this way, that the embodied human identity includes or is your nature, which is all, you could say, okay, so this is the thing. If we got into the tapestry of being more directly, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, you could say there's a spectrum within all of these. So from my perspective, even the human, you could say the embodied human dimension, there's a lot that is part of that. It's not simply one thing. It's not simply one identity. And there's a spectrum there. So our identity as you could say as an ego or as an individual person has a spectrum. And the
it's growing up. Is that what it's growing?
Yes, it's purifying.
Okay.
It's growing and it's moving. And what it's moving toward is you could say, this is where the language becomes that of purification. The language becomes that of deep, I like the words deeper authenticity, because purification, which is valid, I mean, I think it's actually valid language, but it has a kind of a connotation of often of shame, things like that. Oh, I'm not purified and I need to be more purified, and I'm yucky and I'm dross and I need to be silver and all of that. All of those metaphors for me are actually valid in their own right, but they've been kind of contaminated with so much guilt and so much, religious imagery that has to do with shame, that I prefer to kind of emphatically say that even in our messiest, even in our most egoic, that is who we are as well. But once you embrace that wholeheartedly, and I don't mean once you embrace your human nature wholeheartedly, it's intrinsically natural for us to move towards integrity if we are actually self-examining. This is not true for everybody. This is true for those who are on the spiritual path that are interested in self-examination and clarity. And what that ends up doing is it ends up, you continue to examine your own nature, your own patterns, and underneath them is something akin to some people would say the soul nature. Some people would say the higher soul nature rather than the lower soul nature. It just depends on the tradition. But basically, you begin to penetrate your own desires and habitual patterns. And you see that underneath them when you look deeper and deeper, is always some desire which is of a higher quality and not a lower quality, which is actually, what we find is we can actually trust ourselves. Even in the worst things we've done, underneath it was some reason, some perspective that was distorted, and it was a distorted form of some positive quality. And this has to be seen through examination, not used as an excuse, but deeply understood, directly feeling into. A lot of times, shame and guilt, while I'm not, especially shame, let's say shame itself is not worth very much, but guilt sometimes has, when we look into it and we feel into it, and what is it that we felt? Why is it that we did this? What did we want from this? What did we want from this? And it ends up becoming like what we wanted was love. What we wanted was safety. What we wanted was to be seen, to be heard, to be appreciated. And the more we get in touch with that, there's a kind of alchemical shifting of our experience of ourselves, so it becomes more nectarous. And yes, there's a unique nectarous quality of presence that we move to. And there it becomes very, very close to the energetic presence identity that I was speaking to. This is why I say it's on a spectrum. Like I have, and we'll get into this later with the tapestry of being. You could, there's colors connected with it just because it's easiest to use colors, because colors are a spectrum, right? So the embodied, right? So the embodied.
I read your essay this week. I read it all this week. So.
Excellent. Yeah, so you get that. The embodied human identity is connected to the energetic presence identity. And it is through that soul nature, that you could say higher human nature, that happens in higher, lower. This is, it's that it is more authentic. You could say the more authentic we are in our feelings as human being and expression, then it becomes more and more touching on the energetic dimension. So this when you're speaking, something that may be very vulnerable to you, sharing or feeling very vulnerable, and you allow yourself to be there in the vulnerable feelings. From there, it feels energetic. You may feel some kind of transmission, some opening. This is a lot of times what people talk about when they're in their heart. There's a deep authenticity and a deep integrity that comes from speaking your truth, even if it is painful truth about how you felt or things you've gone through, where you begin to open up into a more energetic dimension. And then a natural silence comes. Was that helpful?
Thank you.
You're welcome. What was the other question you had?
It's probably related, and I don't want to take up too much bandwidth either. So that's good for me, and see if anybody else. Yeah.
Very good.
Okay, we do have Drew Ann, so I'll unmute you, or you got yourself. There we go.
Hi, Drew Ann.
So I want to pick up where you've been speaking. So I'm really curious about if there's constancy of nectar. So looking at patterns, looking at the underneath of patterns, I mean, I'm well established in that, probably maybe a little too much. Last time you and I spoke, we talked about the swings between, peak experiences and then the crash. Now the peak experiences aren't so big. They're significant in shifts.
Right.
But the crashes are just horrendous still. So I'm curious about your verbiage of the nectar.
Well, the irony, okay, so if we're talking nectar, we're now talking kind of embodied human identity as it kind of borders on energetic presence identity. So we're talking kind of an egoic working on ourselves, right? That's the level that we're speaking about.
Okay, I was thinking you were saying nectar would be like a sense of peace or
yeah, but there's
equanimity.
Yes, but there's, to be very clear, this is what I mean when I say 3 dimensions of identity, right? So you could say that the transcendental divine identity, which is consciousness itself, which, you know, in the tapestry is associated with red, just for the quite arbitrary which color is associated with which, but it's important that they are understood to be on a spectrum. That's the most important piece of it. But anyway, that's always the case. In other words, consciousness itself is always the case. It's unearned. There's no process that's involved with that. And so simply recognizing in any given moment that you are the awareness of whatever you're feeling, whatever yuckiness is there, whatever state is there. If it feels depressive, it feels expanded, it feels whatever, that's not, in a sense, that's not the point as far as conscious, as far as your nature is consciousness. And to allow attention to go to, you could say, to the unearned, always already the case, freedom that you are. You can do that anytime you want. And
It is a trick. I mean, it's a trick.
well, that, and I would say that it's a trick for the ego to think about it and to figure it out and to go there, but it's always the case. So the trick may be for the mind to be quiet enough at any given time.
And the contraction, sometimes it's a physical contraction.
It can be a physical contraction and
not be preoccupied with that.
Right. Well, how much energy and attention is available to rest as consciousness. But consciousness is there, aware even of contracted attention and all of that.
Sure.
So yeah, that's right. Same thing with, you could say, with the energetic presence identity in its expansive one with everythingness. That's always the case. You always are one with everything. But again, how much attention, energy, and attention is available for that to be experienced in any given moment, for want of a better way of speaking. Exactly. So the thing that, so let's go to blue now, or the, so that's the embodied human identity, or the egoic consciousness that is struggling with seeing through its patterns and trying to breathe into it and doing processes to open up and feel more expansive or more energy and attention. The irony is that what I found in this dimension, and it's not just my finding, but many people in many groups, including the Trillium work, but it's also in Tibetan Buddhism, it's in some forms of Kashmir Shaivism. There's a recognition that the irony is that if you struggle with dark places, it sometimes makes them worse. So it's a bit like, I like to talk about the old, and I don't even know if they're actually Chinese, but I used to buy them in Chinatown as a kid in New York. They were called Chinese finger cuffs, and they were, made of some kind of, I don't know, I think it's like bamboo or something, but they were woven. And it can be made of anything. It can be made of cloth as well. But if you pulled your fingers apart fast, you're stuck. But if you gave in to being your bondage, then the link would open up and you can slip out easily. And it's very much like that. You could say resistance is actually what is the contraction. And so the more you resist the contraction, the deeper in you get. So this is why I speak so much about embracing the most contracted egoic consciousness. And I speak against shame in terms of, like, yes, you just did something, but guilt itself is something that we feel. So from my perspective, shame is kind of a reaction to guilt. And it's a learned behavior, that there's something wrong with us. Whereas guilt is something like there's something wrong with what I just did, right? And there can be many things wrong with things we do. And I say wrong, I mean, we are bucking up against our own sense of integrity. It doesn't feel in alignment with our deepest truth. That's what I mean by wrong. So we have to kind of distinguish between, well, other people say it's wrong and we say it's wrong. We can even get rid of the word wrong and simply say it's out of alignment with our deepest sense of truth when we feel guilt. A lot of people, when they feel guilt, they go, well, this is automatically from outside. So and then they close their own feeling and become further contracted. So they shut down on feelings.
Well, how about if it's based on existence rather than just, psychological?
Right. Well,
existential. That's the word.
Existential, then, so in other words, let's put it this way. Inherently, as you know, inherently, life is unsatisfactory. Inherently. For the human individual, life is unsatisfactory. In the sense that we don't, despite despite a kind of cultural overlay, particularly in the West, I mean, it's true everywhere. You could say it's a pretty postmodern idea that life itself is a place for you to follow your dreams and get them fulfilled. Wow, what a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
What a recipe for disaster.
Manifest your dreams. Yes, yes.
It's not that we are not the mechanism in us to produce desire and dreams is not valid. But the idea that it's anything more than a guidance mechanism to know what the next thing to do is, but rather that you have to get to the end and get it fulfilled in order for it to be worthwhile. That's the trap.
Okay, so let's go back to the guidance.
Yes.
So when a desire arises, you're saying that's just a flag in terms of guidance?
Well, it depends on the desire too. I don't quite mean to say just desire itself, but let me say this, that there is nothing wrong with having a desire to start a business. Let's just get really clear about something. I like to use an example. To start a business and make it happen, right? Mm-hmm. And in fact, if you pursue that, pursuing it with the desire that I'm going to make it happen it can be very important in terms of getting it, optimizing the possibility that it will happen. But if you think that you failed if it doesn't happen, because it's really about getting your dream, then that's a recipe for disaster as well. In other words, it's about you doing going through the thing and wanting to make the business happen, and then either it happens or it doesn't. You could say your destiny or what you were here to do was to do that, even if it's failure, even if it doesn't happen, even if at the very beginning you can't get the loan, or you do it and you put your all into it and it fails after 4 years. Oh well. Or you do it and you put your all into it and it's a great success. In all those cases, that was what was meant to happen. That was what you should be doing. Or put it this way, that's the perspective to put on in relationship to it. You could say that's the tantric perspective. This is kind of spoken of in the Bhagavad Gita with Krishna telling Arjuna, your reward is to do it, not to the outcome. You leave the outcome in my hands, meaning in God's hands. It's not up to you.
Okay, so
Does that mean you go, oh, well, I'll enter into the battle and whatever happens, happens? No, you're a warrior. You marshal all of your attention and everything else to go do that.
okay, so this is really good. So how to differentiate between desire that's authentic. So you were mentioning, when you were chanting, the guidance component, the innate nature of guidance within. So how to differentiate between guidance and so just
this is
it. Whatever.
Yeah, well, this goes to what Derwin was speaking about in terms of what we talked about in terms of purification and in terms of, and that word purification, you say more and more authentic, deeper authenticity. Here's the deal. You don't get to figure out ahead of time. This is what we all want. Like,
well, this is where you and I got stuck, because I think there's innate intelligence, and it has a resonance.
Yes.
So I do think there's a way to actually tell, not the outcome by any means. I'm not talking about the outcome. I'm talking about the refinement of
yes,
action, non-action.
Yeah, right, but it happens as you go along. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't be asking this question. You would know the answer. This would be no struggle at all. In other words, this is a real, authentic one, and now I'll move on. It's more like you are given the amount of certainty you need to take the next step. And then you take it, and in the midst of taking it, it might be a week, it might be a year, you go, wow, really, the more I feel into it, I'm not sure if I even want to do this business. And you have to feel into it more. And you become more authentic. And then you go, no, I do. What it is I don't want it to be this kind of business. I want it to be this kind of business. And then you continuously refine. And you continuously refine. You take the next step and you continuously refine.
So the refinement isn't mental discernment as much as it is opening or contraction. I mean, I don't know.
It's not even that. It's actually about feeling into what was felt, regardless of whether it's contraction or expansion. In other words, it's not about chasing expansion. It's about being present to what actually is being felt. The natural outcome is expansion.
Well, so
that's a big, important piece.
So this is what I've been looking.
Chasing positive states.
No. I'm looking at discernment as, is there openness, then act, not the outcome. Is there openness or is there contraction? So that's where I've been taking my discernment, not so much. So based on openness, then full force action or subtle action, whatever is needed. But that's the discernment place I've been landing.
Good. And how's that working for you? That's just, that's. Do you feel confidence in your way of moving in the world in terms of that?
I'm confident in the openness, but acknowledging the openness, I'm not as confident in.
Okay.
Because I seem to be going through, like, there'll be 2 or 3 weeks where it's easy to access the openness, it's flowing, and then
but see, okay, so it's more about actually being present to what is rather than trying to access the openness.
Well, when
judo of it, otherwise it's an overriding. So look, What I'm saying is that you stay present to what you're actually feeling. And if it's openness, you will naturally be drawn to doing that. And if it's closeness, you will naturally it will be impossible after a while for you to continue to do that. So it's it's about being present to what you're truly feeling.
Okay, so let's take it into that. So the actual experiencing of the closedness.
Yes. And you do then you go, I'm feeling closeness. Let me feel this deeply. And you allow yourself to feel the closeness, and you be present to closeness, and you go about your business. Very different thing than you're closed and you're not paying attention to it because it feels uncomfortable, and you're doing, so you're not being conscious of it, or you're like, oh, I gotta open this, I better open this. That's not it. It's like, that's the judo I'm talking about. You allow yourself to actually feel the closeness and be feeling closeness.
So there's been both times of manipulating the closeness and times of actually sitting in the closeness.
It's just natural. So you just notice when you're manipulating the closeness that that might be a form of triage. You might have to do that to get through the day. But the more, the more and more you're willing to be present to what is, the more and more authentic being or essence you will find. You could say the pearl of price, great price is that. The more and more you're present even to difficult emotions. And a lot of that has to do with dropping judgments about them and dropping ideas about what they mean.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's a different, you could say then that becomes like a kind of a reframing. Like, this uncomfortable feeling doesn't mean that I'm wrong. And you just let yourself feel it more. It may, and then it starts to reveal itself to you. You see, it's like, I'm pointing to something, but there's no formula for this. In a sense, it really is a very individual walk. It really is about intuitively feeling more and more what there is for you to do and what there is not for you to do. But by non-avoiding what you're actually feeling in any given situation. Sometimes, and look, this is not simply turning inside only, because you're looking outside as well, and you're listening to what other people are saying to you, because it includes the whole thing. You could say the embodied human identity realm is not simply about turning your attention inside, but you're an embodied human identity. So you're in relationships, you pay attention to what the options are. Sometimes the options don't reveal themselves for you to do anything else. Sometimes you have to do something that doesn't feel in accordance with your authentic nature. Oh, it doesn't feel true to me. I hate this, but I've got to eat. There's nothing else to do. And then what does it mean to be authentic? It means to be feeling the squeeze of that situation. And this is what I meant when I said it's not pleasant necessarily as individual beings to be on this planet. There's a kind of alchemical transformation that happens in the midst of this pressure.
Good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. That's great. Good, Joanne. It's good to see you again. Is there anyone else?
Currently, there aren't any hands. Anyone on the phone is welcome to press star 6 and get on here.
So I'll say a little bit more about the kind of, you could say it this way, rather than using the words purification, it may be better simply to say there is a freeing of energy and attention in this process. The more we are willing to feel directly what our experience is as body, mind organisms, as a human being, you could say, as an emotional being, the more energy and attention that was dedicated to avoiding being here. You could say, in a very real way, existentially, it is just difficult to be here as human beings. It is really difficult. And there's a kind of aversion toward life itself. You know, we distract ourselves, or we can even, you could say, we can even run to the place of consciousness itself, you know, place our attention there as a way of not having to deal with like unnecessarily having to deal with life. So this becomes very, very tricky, because there are those who have transcended altogether any need to, you know, could say, engage with other human beings or anything. And if you're one of those, what? Great, excellent. It's like, certainly I wouldn't be talking to Ramana Maharshi about getting, purifying the, you know, all of that. None of it. But if you can live like Ramana Maharshi, where you are absolutely, fine, then that's your path. You absolutely have no possessions, basically a homeless person, with no, you know, spouse, no sexual life, no possessions. If you die tonight when you go to sleep, fine. If you have a disease, terrible disease, well, that's what's just supposed to happen. For those souls, for those beings, they're kind of like beacons of one or the other of those dimensions. They're sort of like an emblem, like Ramana Maharshi is an emblem for the transcendental divine identity, or for the red dimension. It's like people went and sat in his presence and basked in that simple transcendental divine identity, and had that awakened in them. But then they had to go home and live their lives, and that's what happens with all of us. So there are those who that is quite natural. For many of us, though, what that would do would bring up great suffering and fear and despair, to literally be homeless. And so what is there to do then? It would be to bring attention in any situation we're in which we feel our bodies, our relationships, our capacity to live, to feel those fears, because there's an existential situation we're in, which Ramana faced when he was 17, which is sometimes just summed up with the word death. But it's the whole thing of not being in control. You know, we would love to be in control of health. And we do whatever we can, but there are things beyond our control in terms of health. And we know that at some level. A drunk driver can go up on the sidewalk, hit us, and we can be crippled. No matter how great our diet was, how much exercise we got, what kind of thoughts we thought, these things can still happen. Now, some people would argue with that. No, they can't unless they're supposed to. And okay, yeah, unless they're supposed to, but you don't know they're supposed to. Some people would say, you can't, and that's fine. I don't have much to talk about there if we want to have a conversation about that possibility. From where I'm sitting, anything can happen to any of us at any time. And we don't have control over that. And it's almost like our duty, again, it makes sense, it's rational, let's just say it that way, to do whatever we can for our health, to do whatever we can for our monetary well-being, to do whatever we can to establish relationships so that if we get sick and we can't earn money for a little while, we have friends who will take care of us, to have those connections. That just feels right to us. That's within integrity for us. Unless you're really one of these very unique beings. And pursuing those is fine, but it ends up being the same situation for us and Ramana, is that our life is not in our hands. So the degree to which we're able to be with that existential fact of death, of being out of control, the degree to which we can be with that, it actually frees up energy and attention that was dedicated to avoiding that. And the more energy and attention that's dedicated to avoid, that's freed from dedicating to, from that dedication, the more energy and attention can naturally rest in our transcendental divine identity as consciousness itself. And the more energy and attention, you could say it this way: the more energy and attention is freed, the attention naturally rests. You could say we're more here, we're more present. Just naturally, more of our attention is present, resting in the consciousness position, resting as consciousness itself. And the more energy is freed from avoiding uncomfortable feelings, the more that energy becomes all pervasive, becomes blissful, becomes the energetic presence or aligned with energetic presence identity. So the irony is, the more we allow ourselves to rest in the contracted feelings and states and look deeply into the thoughts that are connected with them, and being willing to feel the feelings directly, the more we do have access, easier access to that which doesn't change and that which is all-pervading bliss. So those begin to bleed through even into our embodied human experience. So then, even in the midst of our egoic consciousness, we are aware of consciousness and we are aware of our blissful nature. And then whenever we like to, we can allow ourselves to recede into the position of simply recognizing ourselves as that consciousness, not just aware of that consciousness. So it kind of flips between being aware of the space, being the space, being aware of the space, being the space, being aware of the bliss, being the bliss, being aware of the bliss, being the bliss.
Beautiful. You ready for another question?
Sure.
Henry?
Hi. You got me unmuted?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good. Okay. Hello, Krishna Gauci.
Hi,
And
it looks like you're at my house.
Pardon me?
It looks like you're at my house.
Oh, right. I had noticed that, kind of think of it. Just a little bit of a different color.
Yeah, a little bit of a different color. Good to see you. Henry, nice to meet you.
Likewise. Well, I'd kind of like to ask a question about I want to get speaker view here. Hold on a second. Okay. About a pattern in my, the relative me, the non, yeah, you know what I mean, the relative me.
Human identity, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. I've been, when I notice that I'm thinking, when I notice that thinking is arising,
yes,
most of the time I notice that I'm in the future. I'm rehearsing. I'm planning a conversation. This is what I'm going to say. This is what I'm going to do, and a lot of it also has to do with planning. Planning this, getting this done. The universal to-do lists, but I've got many of them.
yes.
And recently, I've been wondering, more. I've been trying to free myself of that for a long time, but not successfully. So what I tend to do when I'm there, I used to try to just be more deliberate in the thinking and let go of the planning, or just notice sensation in my body and breathing or whatever. And there's a mantra that I like, that I repeat when I find myself just stuck in the planning stuff. But it does, the strength of the pattern has not really, well, it's diminishing a bit with age. I mean, as I'm getting older, it's kind of like I'm being forced in a way to not do as much. But at the same time, that pattern is, I'm kind of disappointed that I can't do as much, because I've never been able to keep up with everything that I think should be done.
Yes.
But now it's even worse, because, you know, I can't move as fast, or I'm not as quick with the mind, and so on and so forth. So I'm just wondering if you can suggest some, and through it all, I know that that's not me, you know, I don't beat myself up for it and all of that, but I still find that it's a bit of a nuisance to keep, you know, being caught in this pattern. So I don't know if you have any feedback on that.
Yeah. Well, you can apply discrimination towards the thoughts themselves. That can be helpful. I mean, the biggest piece I'd like to ask you is if the planning pieces or the thoughts about the future are things that you have any control over or not. In other words, the things you plan about, or the things that you think about in the future, are they things that are in your hands, or are they things that are beyond your control?
Most of them are pretty much within my, you know, it looks like they're doable. You know, like I could manage to do this if I got around to it, you know.
So what's the problem then? Why do you have this notion that you shouldn't be planning, that there shouldn't be any planning mind?
Because it takes me out of the moment. You know, like I find myself being lost there, caught there. In other words, it's not, when I sit down and deliberately plan, it's one thing, you know, but when I'm just walking down the street and I'm not noticing anything around me, and I'm just caught there, and I say, "Oh, there I go. There it is again." I'm just not present. That's the biggest problem.
So do you feel, or do you think there's a part of you that feels that it's necessary to do that?
To do the planning?
Yeah, to do that obsessive planning. That you can't do it just deliberately, because if you do it deliberately, that's not enough.
Oh, I do it deliberately every day. I mean, I have, you know, I organize my day and so on and so forth. And even though it's all down, I still get, you know,
right,
rehearsing. I'm still rehearsing.
Right. So when you're rehearsing, when you notice that you're rehearsing, do you continue to rehearse?
No, when I notice it, I just say, "Oops," you know, there I go again. Breathe, you know. No, so like I said, I either come into my sensation, or I decide, well, I can't think. I do a little song mantra, a Buddhist thing.
Okay. So I'm just, when I'm hearing, now tell me if this is incorrect, is that after you recognize that you were planning unnecessarily and weren't present to where you are,
right,
that you then do something to snap yourself out of that and be present to what is?
Well, I've been snapped out of it. I mean, I didn't do anything to snap myself out of it. But once it has happened, once snapping out of it has occurred,
once it's happened,
I say, "Oh, okay. Well, I don't want to go back there. You know, let me just kind of stay present. How can I stay present? Okay, sensation. You know, breathe, feet on the ground, motion, walking, mantra. You know, maybe that'll keep me from going back there. You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, eventually I find myself back there."
Yeah.
Another part of it is that it's stressful. That's another piece of it. I mean, all of this stuff to do. I'm 80, and the list doesn't get shorter, you know, and it's stressful, you know. It's just I would like to. I spent a fair amount of my life hitchhiking, partly because of this. It was my way of handling it. I just hit the road for years, actually, and was homeless because this is a lifelong deal. And I got better but it's still stuck with this thing, you know.
Right.
Well, anyway, I don't want to take too much time here. It's
fine. Let's stay with this just for a little bit longer.
All right.
So there's two things. There's one way. I mean, and they're both. I like to burn the candle at both ends.
Okay.
So on one end, I'd say this burns itself out. The more that there's two things. There's the seeing of what's happening and recognizing, whoa, I've just been thinking, right?
Yeah.
And then there's a thought that arises that says, the way in which I snapped out of this is not enough. I want to never. Let's see what happened. I got an echo there. I want to never re-identify again, and then find myself remembering. See, the thing about remembering and forgetting is that they happen by themselves.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. But you want remembering to happen.
I don't want to be constantly remembering.
Yeah. But you remember, don't you?
Well, the remembering occurs. Yes. Yes.
Huh?
Yeah.
And forgetting happens the same way, doesn't it?
I'm not sure which way either one of them happens, really.
Do you intend to remember a moment before you remembered?
No, I don't think so.
No. Do you intend to forget a moment before you forget?
Oh, no, I guess not.
Yeah. So these things happen by themselves.
Right. Yeah.
So what would be the piece that is creating annoyance to this thing that's happening of itself? I mean, everything ultimately is happening by itself, but in particular, forgetting and remembering is really happening of itself on another level altogether. Is, this thing of like, I've got to always remember. I should always remember.
It doesn't even feel like it should. It just feels like it would be nice, It would, it doesn't feel like an obligation. It feels
I'm
more
really
like
glad to hear that. That's excellent.
It seems more like a possibility that is evading me,
Yeah. So I
mean, there have been periods in my life when I was in total bliss and I wasn't concerned with this, it was at all, I mean, I'm talking about days at a time when I was just I didn't actually appear. I mean, I disappeared and something else appeared and I lived from that for a while and it was great, and so that's happened a few times, but I didn't do anything to make that happen. Well,
you did. You probably did. I mean, sometimes it happens by itself altogether, but probably you spent some time with some teacher who pointed you to something, or you read some book, or you heard.
Yeah, actually, yeah, that's true. That's true. I was actually doing some dancing that was kind of opening me and stuff like that, right?
Yeah. So look, I mean, at a certain, there's two, like, again, burning the candle at both ends. At one end, there's actually, I mean, for want of a better word, a devotional piece to this for me. And it may not be your nature, but there's a devotional piece in that there is something there you could say, and I'm speaking to you because of what you just said. I know you have some intuition of this larger sense because you know it. There is a larger way, a larger beingness, which is forgetting in you and remembering in you. It isn't the small you, this ego, that's doing this. I mean, this is sometimes what they mean by Shakti, or say consciousness itself is not doing anything. It's just aware of everything. But the activity of consciousness, or the Shakti of consciousness, whether you call it the goddess or you call it Ishvara, the Lord, or you call it just the universe, whatever you want to call it. That's bigger than you. That's the one that's beating your heart. That's the one that is remembering and forgetting in you. the ego itself doesn't really have that much power, right? So what there is a surrender to that one which is living you. That is surrendering, that is remembering in you and forgetting it in you. That you which decides to forget when it forgets and decides to remember. Or maybe it doesn't decide, but just does it naturally. But you need to surrender to that one. There isn't anything you can do about that at that level. But you can become more like in a relationship to that whole process, which is, okay, Lord, or you who, or beingness, you've decided to wake me up in this moment to the fact that I'm not present. Thank you. And when you decide to have me forget again, okay. And then remember again, because it's only in the remembering. In the forgetting, there's no one, you're gone with the birds, right? So there's no problem until you remember. And then when you remember, and I like that you say it's not a problem, it's not a should, but then there can be a surrender to that one who is remembering and forgetting as you, and say, okay. And it's, of course, is this like you say, a higher dimension of you? Is it you yourself? Yes. But the way to speak to you yourself sometimes when you're feeling separate is as if you're separate, because it's basically you're speaking to a larger dimension of yourself, saying, I'd like to remember more if it's possible, but if it's not, if for some reason me forgetting and remembering is what's to happen, okay. But let me tell you my preference. I wish I would remember a bit further. This is something called prayer. This is something that is, part and parcel of traditional Advaita Vedanta. It's right in there that, that yes, when you're feeling like an individual ego self, that it's appropriate to talk to the controller or Ishvara or the Lord or whatever, in whatever way you want to think about them. And yes, it's a dimension of mind. It's not, ultimately, it's not the way it is, but ultimately nothing is the way it looks, in the state of feeling separate. So it's totally appropriate to then turn towards the universe and say, hey, I really like this. Nevertheless, thy will be done. It's going to happen as you decide anyway. I'm going to wake up at the level and when you decide it, because it's you deciding or you waking in me to begin with. So there's that. Then there's the other thing. So that's one end of the candle. Does that make sense, what I've said, or is that?
Yeah.
And what comes up for you, by the way, as I say this? Just
what comes up?
Yeah.
Well, I like the devotion aspect. My body's kind of, resonating with it all. Yeah.
Good.
It feels good.
Good. Excellent. So there's that piece. That's one side. And that's, in a way, I would even say, for the embodied human identity, that is a huge piece that is often left out on, well, not always, but for some people who are, non-dual folks, neo-Advaitins, whatever you want to call them, because we're kind of allergic to the whole thing that happened in our Western traditions around devotion. And that's fine. That makes sense why we would. But now, in the knowledge that something larger than us or beyond us, transcendent to us, is actually living us, and when we are speaking from the human point of view, to surrender to that and to be non-resistance to the will of life itself, of the universe itself, or to God himself, or goddess herself, whatever way you want to speak about it. That's definitely a big part of the embodied human. And then to actually go into, to whatever degree, at any moment, right after you go, oh yeah, to kind of rest your attention and notice that all of this, the remembering, the forgetting, that's all happening in thought. That in this moment, there is no past. It's a thought that you forgot something. There is only now, here. So the idea that you forgot something, ultimately not true, because there's no one there to forget anything. You're simply aware. And you know, in the actual noticing now, if where you're at when you notice, oh, I'm not aware of everything, as an ego, you're still going, oh, I'm not aware of everything. What's aware of that ego, that thinker that's aware, oh, I'm aware, I'm not present to everything. What's aware of that? And be the awareness of that, for want of a better word. Because the awareness of that is only now. There isn't any past. There isn't any present, and there isn't any future. The very idea that, oh, I want to live more in the moment is a joke from the position, from the perspective of consciousness itself. There is only now.
Right.
And as soon as the seeing happened, it's seen to be just a display in consciousness. Even the seeing, the forgetting was a display, the remembering was a display. And in this very moment, even the word display is too much clinging to a past thought called display. And if it's, you know, suits you to be in touch with the sensations of the body as a kind of a stepping stone, you know, you could say on the way to transcendental divine identity, in which there's no past, no present, no future. There simply is. There can be a kind of step of allowing attention to rest simply in sensation and ignore thoughts but be in sensation, which is more in alignment with, you could say, your energetic presence identity. It's just being presence, the feeling sense of presence. That's beautiful, but what's aware even of presence? Take that next step. What's aware of presence? Now, the thing about steps here is it's just a way of talking. Because normally on a step, you'd leave behind one step to go to the next step. But here, the steps is you are receding to the place of the ground of being, simultaneously allowing the others to be there as well. So you don't have to leave embodied human identity in order to recognize your sense of presence, the sensations of being. You can notice the thinking mind and all of that. And then you don't have to leave behind the sensations of presence to recognize that which is aware, or to be that which is aware of the sense of everything. So I don't know, that might be, I'm sure that's more words than necessary, but
well, not for me.
Oh, good. Yeah. So how's that? Wonderful.
That's great. Thank you very much, Krishna. Thank you.
My pleasure. It's very good to see you. Nice to meet you.
Likewise. Good to meet you.
So Sarah, are there any other questions?
Let's see. Not that I can see at the moment. We had to say goodbye to Derwin, who has 2 children to take care of this weekend, but he said thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So I'll just say a little bit about the retreat that, or the we could call it a retreat, online retreat that we're going to be having in January. It's going to be on the tapestry of being, and it's actually going to be about your life, and just using the tapestry of being as a frame of reference. So some of you may not have read the intro on the tapestry of being that we made available. That's fine. But I'll say this, just a little bit about it. There's from my experience of working with people over time, I began to notice particular, you could say, stuck places and confused places having to do with not making certain distinctions, having to do with what is often called the relative and the ultimate. And So can you turn off the sound on yours for now?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Yes.
That's okay. Great. So it's good to take notes, though. Yeah. So the distinctions that came to my awareness over time working with people had to do with really valid things that were happening in their lives, but were sometimes being discounted because they'd be standing on one platform of reality and looking at other dimensions of themselves and saying, oh, this is useless. And then later on, standing on the other and saying, well, what about this? So there are times in their lives when they were, I mean, I really love what Henry just said, because it was really touched on this. Like when he said, yeah, there were times where there was no I at all, and I was going on, and now I'm wondering about, my little self and a question about that. And giving ourselves permission to speak that way, speak from, you could say, relative truth, and not see the relative truth as something that's really other from spiritual life, even though it is relative. Sometimes there's points in our lives, this is what I've found within my own life and within the lives of the people that I've worked with, where they are standing in the place of consciousness itself, and in that place. So if we can mute all the people who...
Yeah, I got it. I muted him.
Standing in the place of consciousness itself, and from that place, really seeing the way in which the relative world is not real, and putting attention in the relative world seems to be futile, or living one's lives in accordance with what is understood in the relative world seems like a waste of time, and actually digging a hole that's deeper. So it's discounted. It's not real. I don't feel that to be real. Right? That's one experience. Then on the other extreme, there's moments when we are identified with our separateness so clearly that we remember our experience of, we can remember times when our attention was resting in consciousness itself and go, what a waste. What a waste that was. This is delusion. What good does that do me now? Here I am. That's an extreme position. A lot of people will be, it's also likely that they'll go, oh, I wish I could get back there, but I'm stuck here. And that's, maybe not quite as painful, but, it's also painful in itself, where that they were identified as a unique individual having the remembrance of attention resting in consciousness itself, and feeling like that was a waste, that was useless. How could that be the highest anything? I mean, it's just that's delusion. That's ignorance, because I have to live in the real world right now, and I have real relatives or real children who are suffering, and I have a real spouse that's suffering, and I have a real life, and all of that, and I have to really do this to live. So from my perspective, this comes from the exclusive perspective of this is real or this isn't real, rather than it's all real, or there's a way in which it's all real. Even with the understanding and the recognition that ultimately it's not real. Relatively, things are real, so they're actually experienced. And so the tapestry of being is basically about 6 different nodes. And there's a lot that goes in with each of the nodes, but you could say the transcendental divine identity, which is consciousness itself, for want of a better term. The energetic presence identity, which is our you could say, is the realm of our identity of pure feeling, pure energy, pure presence, where there's not an individual I so much as an all-pervading sense of bliss, of beingness, of I amness. Whereas consciousness itself, the red dimension, the transcendental divine identity, is the awareness even of I amness. The purple energetic presence identity is our experience as energy, as I amness, as feeling sense. And you could say there are exercises and there are pointings directly to our transcendental divine identity, which are crucial to have from my perspective. And there are pointings to our sense of I amness, of presence, of energy, of all-pervading feeling that are very important to have. If you have teachings that are simply red or simply transcendental divine identity, they tend to be dry. Even though they're very crystalline clear, they can be dry and kind of impersonal. And you can feel that. And there are experts, great experts, wonderful people who are specialized in those. And often we'll go to them when we want to get cleared from our thinking mind and even from our emotional bodies, like, just give me the clear, this person really does that. But then we go, but that's not, we'll do that for a while, but it's not enough. What about the pervasive feeling juiciness of this? And then there are teachings and teachers who are mostly pointing to the sense of presence, actually. And they'll also be known as non-dual teachers, but the emphasis is a little different. The emphasis is more on teachings having to do with presence, with feeling sense, and the sense of expansion. Very important. But also different, you could say consciousness itself is the space in which that presence is arising. But the sense of presence can expand and contract. So that's really important to understand the distinction there. And then there are, the embodied human identity teachings, which are teachings about what is it to purify and become more, purify or become a more authentic human being, more subtle human being, more and more integrity, so that there's more and more energy and attention that is freed from avoiding the difficult existential angst that is at the center of our lives, the vulnerability of what it is to be a human being. Because there's a direct vulnerability, and openness in that vulnerability is a spiritual awakening in itself. It's a quality in itself that drops us into the essence of what it is as an individual being. That is just on the border of that open, expanded sense of presence, of the energetic presence identity. The other piece, the other three pieces have to do with relationship. Because once we acknowledge, once we are inclusive of our embodied human identity, then we need to be inclusive then of the sense that there's other embodied human identities, other consciousness. And they exist in of themselves as well. And how to be in relationship in such a way that you are becoming more and more authentic and you are inviting people more and more into their own authenticity. All the messiness that comes from with embodied human identity, then we have all the messiness that comes from embodied human relationships. And then the sense of otherness in terms of energy. So you could say the energetic presence relationship dimension. And what is that? All the ways in which when we go to teachers, we feel their energies. What is that all about? What is it all about to be to receiving transmissions? Or even on this call, you might be experiencing some feeling of expansion or transmission. What is that about? How much of it is my energy? How much of it is your energy? What does all that mean? What does all the resonance mean? And then to go even further into that dimension, which is the yellow dimension, the dimension of energetic presence relationships. What about when we are feeling the sense of presence, even when there's no human body there? So we have pictures of sages on our shrine, or maybe just in our house, and we look there and we feel the energy of that being who may not even be in a body now. We don't even know sometimes if that person even physically existed. If you have a picture of Krishna, you might say, yes, he did. You might say, no, I don't know. But still, when I look at a picture of the God Krishna, I see the energy. Lord Buddha, I see the energy. Amitabha Buddha, who we know did not walk on the earth. Amitabha Buddha was not, a physical being on this planet anyway, maybe in some other dimension. What is that when we sit in front of that picture and feel that presence, and we love those pictures, and we feel that presence, and we love that transmission? That's a whole transmission. That's a whole dimension of teaching, which is valid and can be conducive to our non-dual realization and the freeing of attention and energy. And yet speaks the language of duality, of relative reality at the same time. And then finally, devotion, where we end up feeling all of the energies, all of the teachers, all of the people in our lives are manifestations of one, even our own body, of one all-controlling power, of all manifesting power. And our relationship to that, even with our knowledge that we're non-separate from that, still we feel to be in some relationship to that one, and how to relate to that one, and our unique way of relating to that, discovering our unique way, because everybody's different. As individual beings, everybody's different. As consciousness itself, there's no individual beings. So there's difference and there's non-difference, and the relationship between those are really, I think, crucial for those of us who are awakening beings. So the tapestry of being is about that, and it's about living your entire life as a form of spiritual living. So that's the things that will be the context in which we'll be doing our teaching and visiting together in the retreat. And there'll be plenty of exercises, meditating together, some silence together, questions and answers, all of that. So, is there anything you'd like to say further about all this, Sarah?
Yeah, thanks. I'm so happy you went into all those details on the tapestry. I think that's really important and really perfect. And again, I'm just so excited to get the chance to really dive into the entire, to all the pieces here. It feels just so comprehensive and so worth a longer amount of time. And I also wanted to read just a little bit of what you wrote. You can find all this information on our website, and I'm going to direct you around to that in a second. But I wanted to read just a couple of things you said here too that I really love. The tapestry of being orientation shows a way of looking at life from a perspective of radical subjectivity. It is for people who acknowledge and value the ancient traditions of spirituality that have come before us, but do not find that they can easily give themselves over to one worldview or paradigm altogether. We want to walk our unusual path, but we also want to make sure we're going somewhere worthwhile. I really, really love that. Spiritual awakening is just the start of a road that no one before you has walked. We do not need another program, but rather an orienting perspective to make it clear how our different states are related and flow into each other so that we can choose for ourselves. So people have experienced, after being introduced to this orientation, they've understood in a new way why the practices that naturally drew them were serving their overall spiritual life. And I found this too in relating to your teachings as well, Krishna, what's written here, a validation of our own unique spiritual unfolding, and a means to understand what we can do to deepen our experience and confidence in our inner guidance. So this is really unique. I really love it. It's definitely given me a lot to know you these past couple of years and get to know your work and how it's really helped my path as well. So I also love, what I love about these online retreats is the sense that we will, it's like we'll be meeting 7 times, together. We'll be meeting almost 2 months, same group. And there's a sense of community that gets created that's very unique in an online retreat. That's really special. I've done a lot of these. I've hosted a lot of these online retreats, and it's people from all over the world, and yet there becomes this really palpable and kind of safe container. So in the retreat, the recording, we will be recording each session, but not only to give out to the people in the retreat, if I'm making sense there. So we're recording just so that we'll be sending out the recording a day or 2 later so you can have it to re-listen to throughout the week, but it's not going to be public on YouTube or anything like that. Let me see if I can...
yeah, you'll get recordings of every class that we have if you take the class.
Yeah, you'll get a video recording in a YouTube, and you'll also get an audio recording via Google. And throughout the week, we'll just keep emailing and staying in touch. And Krishna will just be giving just reminders of practices we'll send out in an email throughout the week.
And if any questions arise between classes, you can email me them, and we can also address those during the classes as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. So I want to give time for anyone that has, again, any other questions about this, but I will say a couple of the details. If I'll write on our website, www.nondualcenter.org, on our homepage on the left-hand side of the screen under events is this event for this course. So you'll get to the event page for this course on our website, and then to register for it, on the event page, there's a green button that says tickets. And if you click on that, it will take you to our course registration site, and you can sign up there. So we have an early bird price for the course that's going through December 12th. And we also have a payment plan option, which I'm excited about this feature if you need it. The prices will be going up on December 13th, regular price, and the final registration will be the day before January 6th. So we're starting on January 7th. Sunday, January 7th is probably important to say. And going through February 18th, I believe, every Sunday morning. So if you have any questions about the course at all, you can email me at love@nondualcenter.org and or the contact page on the website. I can answer those questions, and there'll be emails about this. If you did register for this course, we're putting you on our email list at the center. So there'll be emails about this and our future hosted evenings and hosted mornings, our future courses and retreats, as well as a small group offering. We're going to also start in January. I really love the small groups. I think they're so beautiful for all of us around the world. We need so much community. So our members are offering these courses. They're offering to host the small groups. Pretty cool kind of renewal of community spirit happening at the Center for Non-Dual Awareness. So I'm very excited to meet all of you and possibly be connected to you in some way going forward. Does anyone have any questions at this point?
Well, thanks everybody. It's wonderful to see you. Should we open up the mics and so everybody can say goodbye?
That's what I will do. I will unmute everyone and say goodbye. Turn your volume down.
Bye. Bye, Krishna. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Krishna.
Thank you.
Talk soon.
Yeah.
Love to Calgary.
Bye, Henry.
Bye, Sarah. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.